Okay. Hello, everybody. So I get really excited for all these interviews, but I'm particularly excited about this one. Today, we are chatting to Shani. She is the founder of Native Mood, and she is a pleasure and intimacy expert and coach. So Shani has an absolute wealth of knowledge on all things body and pleasure through holistic lens and sexuality, tantra, and neuroscience. Shans, thank you so much for being here today, but also thank you just for opening up these conversations in the space. I know that you work a lot internationally, but it's a particularly interesting and new conversation in South Africa. So welcome here to our mums, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Christie. It's amazing to be here. And yeah, South Africa is always at the heart. And I love that we're leading these conversations together and with other moms. So it's beautiful. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Okay, so I start every interview with two main questions. And the first one is, what's something that you wish that every mom knew about pleasure and intimacy?
So what I wish every mom knew was that it is a power source, right? It's a source of nourishment. It's a source to deeper intuition, which makes a better mom, right? Which makes a better partner, which makes a better person. It's a more regulated nervous system. So pleasure is a power source. Intimacy is a power source. And I think often we can get in the realms of adding it to the to-do list, or it's a duty, or it's like something that we feel like a guilt trip, where it's actually it's a nourishing, really nourishing part of self. So yeah, it makes us a better person, a better mom, a better business partner, all these beautiful things and all these roles that we play in life.
I can't wait to get into that. But before we do my second question, and I always ask this question because I would love to just reframe. Sorry, my phone. I would love to reframe the idea that people have around failure. So my second question is, what area of your life have you failed in? Or what area have you got wrong that looking back, you can see that it actually changed your path and your life, and you've used it as an opportunity to grow?
I love that. Because there's been plenty things, and I love to look at them, like you say, not really as failures, more as reroutes. And what I would say, like specifically into this topic, is the way that I went about my sexuality. Was a sense, not in a failure, but I've had many initiations, which I'm now grateful for, because it gives such a first-hand understanding. So beyond just the expertise and the studies that I've got within sexuality, right, it gives a first-hand knowledge and experiences of many, many different things that I've gone through, right, that I can better understand firsthand. So yeah, I would say, maybe not feeling as safe in my sexuality, not feeling secure in my body. I've been through severe eating disorders, I've been through traumas, all these things that would essentially be a failure, right, as society might deem, but it's been a big part of my purpose and my passion and my leading. And I always knew that going through them. So I always trusted them. I always knew that there was wisdom and lessons, which kept me to the path of just honoring myself throughout each process that I went through.
I love that so much. And I think that so many of us can learn from that, because, there's not actually many people that I've met that feel like they haven't made a mistake, particularly when it comes to this area of their lives, as women going through, whether you're a teenager or university or wherever it was, and you look back and I've done the same. There are some things you look back that you regret. But I love the way that you reframe that those things, even if we're not sex coaches in the end, we can learn so much about ourselves from those experiences and from those things that we maybe didn't like, or maybe did like, or maybe we felt like we did it wrong. So thank you for sharing that.
I love that. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into pleasure. And I know the answer to this because I love reading all your posts, but why is pleasure and intimacy a conversation that we should all be talking about? And why is it something that's so important and should be a more important part of our lives?
Because it's human nature. It's primal, right? I believe that it's something that we all feel. It's not something that I feel, that just you feel, that it's part of human experience, right? So I feel that the more we become connected to it, the more it's a deeper homecoming. It's a deeper connection to self. It like fills that full spectrum of a thriving life, right? Sexuality is a huge part of desire, and I believe that a life of pleasure stems through the body, which is obviously pleasure in the body. So I believe that it's very hard to hold a full life of pleasure if we disconnect from the body. And I believe it all starts with knowing pleasure through the body is how we bring pleasure into parenting, into wealth, into business, into creativity, into health. It all stems within the body, because pleasure is a really powerful aspect in really regulating the nervous system. So I deal a lot with the body in the sense of holding the nervous system. So for me, it's human instinct, and it's fun, and it's beautiful, and it's scary, and it's intimidating. So it should be, we should be having conversations. We should be connecting. We should be supporting each other and safely exploring these.
Awesome. Could you go into that a bit? And I have a huge passion for an understanding of the nervous system. Can you explain the link between pleasure and our nervous system? What happens in our body when we feel pleasure?
Absolutely. So I deal a lot with when we bring in life experiences, right? I do a lot of creating desires through the body. So when we have the nervous system, or when we go into tapping into life, right, there can be a lot of shadow or trauma or experiences or triggers that come up, right? So this is how we can go into trigger responses, into freeze, into flight, into overwhelm, into anxiety, into depressive states. What pleasure essentially allows the nervous system to do, it is so soothing for the body. It is so healing for the body, right? When pleasure is in really safe spaces, it is liberating, it is healing. It's like, it's orgasmic bliss, right? So that soothes the nervous system. So when I work a lot with the body, whether it be specific trauma responses or just elevating life in desires, or really starting to get into embodied, empowered sexuality, we work through the body, because what that does is we create safety in the body, which is how embodiment and desires come to life. So what pleasure does is it soothes the nervous system, right? Because there's lots of life that can be super painful. And I find, especially in the personal development kind of healing world, it can be a lot of like mental work, right? So this is why I bring the body on, and I bring a lot of pleasure into it, because there's times where we're going through where we're trying to better ourselves, where we get too mental focused. And what happens is, and this is what happened with my healing journey when I went through severe anorexia, my mind had healed, but my body got left behind, right? So this is how I got into the whole realm of working with the body, working with the nervous system, so that we also bringing in the somatics. So essentially, you want the mind and the body to be on par. That's how we start to really thrive and create desires, where if we just focusing on the mind, the body gets left behind. So even though your mind is thinking, this is the desire I want, your body might feel unsafe in it. And then there might be the other realm where your body is too much focused that the mind's left behind, right? It's more common than not that it's more the mind that's, like doing all the mental thinking. You can make logical sense of it, but the body still holds maybe the resentment or the guilt or the grief or the sadness. So it's about working with the body, and pleasure soothes that. It's a very natural way of letting the body release trauma, release pain, release emotions. It's a powerful portal. I find one of the quickest ways to personal development is through the body, and particularly through pleasure, because it makes it so fun and enjoyable, and it's such a part of human nature.
Oh, I love that. And I mean, that whole idea that emotions get stuck in our body, it's true, right? Like it's been studied, and what an awesome way to release those emotions and to have them processed. And guys, I hope that everyone listening has really taken that on board, that pleasure is healing. And I hope that kind of takes that guilt part of it out of it, where there is that guilt. And you speak about the safety of, or makes your body feel safe. Is that only true where you're in a safe relationship? Or can that pleasure be true where you're experimenting a bit, or when you're by yourself? Is there a line with that? Is pleasure just pleasure? Or do you have to feel safe in that moment?
So I want to quickly tap into what you said about the emotions, because obviously chatting quickly with, like more specifically to moms, but in non-binary beings and men in general, we hold a lot of our emotions in our sex centers as well, right? So particularly for the female body, the womb, right? And particularly the cervix. So for moms to connect to their pleasure, that is how we connect deeper to our intuition, which means we need to be releasing emotions, which happens through pleasure, right? So it's a very powerful portal because we become more grounded in ourselves. But pleasure and emotions are super connected. And when we do that, we also elevate our sexuality with a partner because it becomes more of an emotional connection than just physical. But we can get into that down the line. On the realms of the safety.
Yes.
This is a fine line, right? And I'm not here to tell anyone specifically what's safe or what's not, because we all go through the human experience of also understanding what safety is to us, right? When I speak into safety or into the elements of really healing through pleasure or allowing it to be nourishing and allowing it to be more than, I guess, just an orgasm, right? It's really about coming into the fullness of self and presence. So what I relate safety to is presence. There's many aspects that it can go to, but where you are very much consensual, you are very much in presence of what is happening, you are in a state of transformation, of healing, right? As soon as you lose that presence and you start to disassociate and you start to leave the body, you are no longer transforming, you are no longer healing because you're no longer in presence. So in the aspects of sexuality and partnership, and can you just explore it with anyone, you've got to decide if that's a desire, right? Okay. So obviously our sexuality is going to go through phases, right? If you're in a monogamous committed relationship now, that's obviously not going to be relevant to you, right? So there's going to be a deepening with one partner. If you are a single parent, or if you are in a place where you are exploring, right, in different partnerships, there's going to be an element of what is safe for you and what boundaries are important for you, what are your needs, what conversations need to be had for you to go into an element of deep sexual thriving. So I'm not really just talking about like the element of like a sexual exchange or anything of that kind, because for us, especially for the feminine, for us to fully surrender and to go into deep orgasmic bliss, safety is the foundation. We will not surrender, we will not submit, we will not even dominate. Like, we won't do that if there isn't an element of deep safety within our own body. This is why it all starts with self, and why I work strongly with self pleasure as the safety first. Because if we come into self and we understand what safety is within ourselves, what our boundaries are, what our needs are with self, we take that so much deeper into partnership, which is where I believe self pleasure to be the full reclamation of self. Because not only what happens, especially where self pleasure is shamed massively in society, right? And especially in the feminine, there's this thing of like, it's desperation, or it's because we can't find a partner, and it's like the last thing that like we really want to do.
Yeah.
If we had to see that as like an empowering stance, right? We start to understand our body, and we understand that our pleasure is alive in us, that orgasmic bliss is alive in us, that ability to transform, to be your highest version of self, to fulfill your desires. They're going to look different on all of us. That's why I don't want to tell anyone exactly what it needs to look like. It's going to be like, what does it look like for you? But for that to happen, we need to realize that that's within. When we think that comes from a partner, we deplete our own power, we deplete ourselves. Your partner enhances it, right? And it's a way that, like, for sure you enjoy it together and you can enhance it, but they're not necessarily activating it in you, right? If a partner tries to activate something in you and you are completely shut off and you're completely closed down, it's not going to happen, right? Whereas if you're allowing it and you're allowing the activation, right, and you're allowing it to go deeper because it's all coming from in you, if your partner's allowing that, knowing that it's coming from them, right? This can be a big ego stance as well, though, because we all want to think we're doing that for our partners, but it's all coming from within them. And when you've got two partners doing that, coming together, that's where you start to have like proper sexual power and connection and elevation and awakening.
And what do you do then if you have two partners just in such different places? Because what I'm understanding from what you're saying is that we all have like a different scope of what feels safe and what's uncomfortable and what we need. And what if we do have a partner that just is in such a different state of what they feel is safe versus what you feel is safe, or where you want to explore? How do you kind of bridge the gap between those?
So this is the powerful thing about partnership and mirroring, because we will always kind of reflect to our partners, right? So when I work a lot with partnerships, it's actually very possible to work with one partner and that partner will automatically start to reflect them, right? So naturally it will inspire, but that's got to be done very consciously from a place of not going in to fix your partner, not trying to force it on your partner, because that will often create more repulsion and rejection and disconnect. So it starts with the conversations, 150%. This has to be spoken about, right? And this is the vulnerable part, because now it's like, hey, I'm wanting to connect more to my sexuality. It's, you know, saying maybe I'm not as fulfilled in our sex life. Maybe I'm needing to connect deeper with myself. So I always encourage the conversations. And in that basis, also explaining why self-pleasure might be a part of it, because especially if the partner is a man, right? But it can go on different spectrums as well, because we're all human and we all have these elements of self. But a man particularly has been taught to provide, they've been conditioned that they have to perform, that they have to please, right? Mm-hmm. So if secretly on the side, you're like trying to explore your sexuality and now you're going to self-pleasure, if that comes out, that is going to create so much rejection and so much disconnection, as opposed to just having the vulnerability of like, hey, let's talk about our sex life. Like, this is what I'm wanting to explore, because I'm wanting to empower like our sex life together, right? Because the truth is, a turned on being wants more turn on. So when we explore this, right, often, and this often comes up with male partners, with the women I work with, it's like this fear of like, yeah, but if she's self-pleasuring, then I'm not going to, like, surely I'm going to get less sex or what's it. But a turned on being wants more turn on. So the more someone is connected to their sexuality, the more that they actually want it, which is probably what you'll see in cycles of parenting. They will go through an element, which is a natural, this is nothing to worry about, of the, you know, sex is cyclical. So we have the summer, the thriving, but we go through the winter as well. That's not necessarily something to panic about. And this will often happen a lot when baby's just been born, when there's like figuring out new phases in parenting. Maybe it's the second or third child being born. Like, there's, you know, different dynamics in relationships within the family are changing. It can cause a winter. But if we are so present with that winter, and if there's communication about it, you will go into a deeper layer of sexual awakening when you go into the summer, because you've allowed it. The problem is when we sit in that winter for too long. So we don't have the conversations, we don't do anything about it, and that's how we start to create that like depletion, that disconnection. So one, I would say it really starts with the conversations, and then it starts with the action, right? So it's like anything, we can't just expect, like, you know, I often think in like the society, we want this, like, it's all about like being the best lover and the best wife and the best mother, and especially in sexuality, there's this thing of everyone wants to speak about like their booming sex life. But no one's really taught how to have good sex. We're not born good lovers. Like, we have to practice. We've got to understand, just as we've got to do anything else, right? So it's I would say that person would naturally shadow you. But how I feel that this comes about is when you embody it in yourself, you naturally inspire a partner. A partner will see shifts in you, and they'll be like, what are you doing? Like, you know, and that's why the openness is exciting, because they're going to feel your turn on. So they're going to naturally be more turned on. They're going to feel your inspiration, your deeper emotional connection, spiritual connection, intellectual connection. Like, sexuality and sex goes way beyond physical, that they're naturally going to start to reflect that. And then there's going to be different conversations and a journey that need to be going on in between of checking in. So that's quite a big topic in itself to go through.
Huge, but I love it. So a turned on being wants to be turned on. That's what you said? Turn on being,
well, I mean, like, it's like a turned on woman wants more turn on, right? Turned on woman wants more turn on. Turned on non-binary being wants more turn on. It's a turn on being, a turn on person wants, it's because it empowers us. Our pleasure is such an energetic, powerful source. And if you think of anything, it's the same thing of like when we are in exercise and we're going for a run. In the beginning, you're not really enjoying it, right? The less you start to exercise, the more you forget how good it feels. Right? So then it becomes so much easier not to go for the walk, not to go for the run. The more you're exercising, and the more you're going to gym, and you're going for the walk, and you're doing Pilates, yoga, whatever it is, and you're feeling good, you're like, gosh, I want to go for it again. Like, I want to do it again. It's exactly the same as pleasure. The more we like, wow, this feels really good, the more we want it.
And that makes so much sense to me. We actually had a conversation yesterday about exercise, just like what you're talking about. And it's so true, I guess, for sex as well. So there are there's some married women on the group, some same-sex women, some single moms on the group. And I can bet that a lot of us actually don't know what we find pleasurable anymore. It's, as you said, it's been a conversation that's been shunned and shamed and a bit taboo. So where do we start to know what we find pleasurable, or how do we even start thinking about that? And I love that you said you start with conversations, but what do you bring to that conversation if you actually don't know yet, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this, because this is like a powerful part of like creating a life of desire. We've got to know what it is that we desire.
Exactly.
Right? We've got to know what it is that we need.
Exactly. And a lot of us, like, you know, and particularly again as mums, it's something that you almost thought like that you shouldn't be thinking about anymore. You know, it's almost like a bit selfish to be putting your pleasure or your intimacy when you have these days full of everything. So how do we start to think about it and know what we want, and then bring it confidently to our partners or whoever we want to explore it with?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will always root it back to self and to the element of self-pleasure. So through that, we start to understand our desires, we start to understand our body more, and we start to understand our connection, right? So I would almost break it down into segments. So if someone really didn't know what they desired, what they felt in their body, how orgasm feels to them, how they want to feel in partnership, I would have this element of start to connect to self-pleasure, right? The basic before that even is sometimes we've been so disconnected to our pleasure so long, like maybe just start to implement pleasure in a different way. So if I've got clients that are very numb and very disconnected, we first start with the basics of implementing like 15 minutes a day to connect to pleasure. That might mean a walk on the beach, it might be a bath, it might be reading a book, it might be making a nourishing meal, and it's literally 10 to 15 meals a day, like 10 to 15 minutes a day. And I know this can be a lot when it comes to parenting, because it's like you try to fit in 15 minutes a day of self-pleasure, like, you know, like all these elements. So I totally understand that. And then there's the element of bringing in, you know, the self-pleasure. And then I would say bringing in with a partner as well, if that's relevant for you, right? Or if you're not in a place with a partnership now and you desire one, like, what do you want the partnership to look like? How do you want the sex life to look? And I think so often, you know, we step into roles without forward thinking and with little intention. So we become the parent when we have the child. We become the business owner when we start the business. How do we get more intentional about that, about what it is that we desire in that? Because that's what makes us thrive. In every role that I've gone in where I've had the intention of it before, I've thrived in it because I've done the groundwork and the basics. So for us to connect to what it is that we need or we desire, we have to go back to basics, right? And allowing that. And what I will say, like, I work with a lot of moms, right? And all of them say that they become better moms when they connect to their pleasure, because their emotions are more regulated. Their nervous system is more regulated. When the child is going on and on and on, they're not in a state where they're just wanting to like shout or scream or like just go. They're more in their body, right? They're more nourished. So they've got more rest. And I would say look at ways in your partnership, and this is why the conversations are important, of how you can connect to that, right? So I have got, you know, partners that they make time for their intimacy. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to like schedule in time for sex, but that's an hour where we're going to connect, whether that's conversation, whether that's a walk, whether that's going out for a dinner or a cup of tea, or it's sex, whatever it is, having that time, right? Where possible. There's times where it's not possible together. And then I've got the native new pleasure ones, and I have got many men that will take the child for the morning or a granny or something, and that mom for an hour will allow herself to have a bath, to connect to her own pleasure, to self-pleasure. Because if pleasure is not happening in partnership, which there's times where it doesn't happen, right? And this is when I'm talking with a lot of newborns, where there's like disconnect in timing and feeding and all of that. I've got partners who make time that there's pleasure alone, and then that naturally makes them want to come together for pleasure. But when you're both depleted, it becomes such a harder spiral, right? To get back into that sexuality. And pleasure can look very different. So I don't want this to be the element of it just has to be sex, it just has to be penetrated, it just has to be orgasm, right? It can be super sensual. And especially obviously chatting with moms, like sexuality changes, right? It changes, through conception. It changes during pregnancy. It changes when you become a mom. And it's when we connect to what we need, that's why it's so important to keep connecting to the body, because then we connect to the way that it changes throughout our life, right? The more we connect, the more it's going to change. So I would say in that element is the only way, and this is why it's so vulnerable, but this is why I believe it to be the most powerful portal, is it requires action, right? So it requires you to take the time and think about your pleasure. Like, are you where you want it to be? It requires the actual action and the embodiment of going into self-pleasure, right? Or of going into partnered pleasure in a different way, wanting to have the conversations, maybe wanting to go in a way of more deeper connection, maybe sharing what you actually desire, so that it's from a place from nourishment. And that is super confronting at times, because we've got to sit with the fact that sometimes we're bored. Sometimes we're not getting pleasured in a way that we want. Sometimes we don't even know what it is that we desire. So it can be confronting, but when we approach that without judging it, letting it be information, being curious about it. So being like, wow, this is what I actually think of this. And then we allow ourselves to step forward. But the more we avoid and disconnect, the more we just spiral in that same pattern. But it can be quite confronting, because it's a very vulnerable, it's a vulnerable act, right? And it's a vulnerable stepping into a vulnerable space.
Definitely. And I mean, something that I'd love to add on that as well is, I think just vulnerability in general, it feels so scary. And like what you're saying, the more that we hold ourselves back from it, the more that our brain's actually telling us, okay, this is something worth being scared about. But sometimes when we take that leap, even if it's just like the start of the conversation, like before the start of the conversation, that's the scariest part. And as soon as you kind of take that leap and be vulnerable and start those conversations, the easier and easier that it gets for us and our partners. And another thing that I wanted to touch on what you just said, and it's true, I think that we do go through these stages, particularly newborns, when we have these babies. And a lot of the mums, actually, when I introduced you on the group, in the post, a lot of them were saying that they actually just don't want sex anymore. Like, they don't have that desire. And as you said in the beginning of the interview, it has become like a responsibility. So my question is then, is that okay? And you mentioned, which I love, that sometimes going for a walk on the beach or making a really nice meal, that's a form of pleasure. Is that okay to kind of retreat into those form of pleasures for a stage, or should we be taking that action and reminding ourselves that we do need that intimate pleasure? Can you talk on that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the beauty of the human experience, right?
I'm so excited to hear your answers.
Yeah, and it's like just allowing our experience to be our experience allows us to move through those better, right? So when we can sit with the fact, and the more we have the conversations, and the more we're radically honest with ourselves, the more we're going to shift out of that. So I would say definitely let it shift. Right. I think of clients particularly where they were like, during their pregnancy, they didn't want sex. They didn't want to be touched, but they had this insane awakening of their sensuality. They were experiencing touch in such a different way. All they wanted was their breasts massaged. And they were like, I was like, how beautiful that your sexuality is shifting. And it's changing. And it was becoming more primal, but not out of chance. It was preparing them for birth, right? It was preparing them for motherhood. So when we allow shifts, we actually empower ourselves, and we go into a deeper, a lot of people refer to it as like a sexual awakening or like a sexual thriving, but we go deeper into our sexuality when we are present with it. So what I would say is to really reflect with yourself, like, what is actual honesty? Because I mean, when we lie to ourselves, we're only fooling ourselves. So what is it like? I really just don't feel like sex. Like, that is not how my sexuality is looking right now, and let it be that. And then notice, where is there something deeper than that, right? So where are we maybe avoiding? Where is there fear? Where is there disconnect? Where is there numbness? Where is there possibly trauma? Where is there something that the body's holding on that we're not looking to face? So there can be two spectrums, right? So I definitely, my biggest thing is to honor the body for where it's at, and then to get radically honest with ourselves, where are we now in a cycle where it's getting, I don't want to say dangerous to partnership, but it's in a way of partnership where it's been now months, going on years, where now there's no sex, there's disconnect. So now the intimacy of the partnership is reflecting, right? And it's starting to take like a downward spiral, because there's so many ways to hold deep intimacy in partnership without having sex, right? Like how can you start to change the sexuality, the sex life in partnership, where just because there's no physical act of sex, how can you still connect on a way that brings that connection, that brings that intimacy, that brings that pleasure? Because then you're naturally going to cycle through different ways, and this deepens partnership in itself, because you've got to get creative, right? You've got to be like, cool, how do we nourish our pleasure, our sexuality, right? It's not looking like sex, and it takes a lot to voice that, right? And where I see the cycle going in, or where a lot of women get trapped, is we feel that we have to do this to keep a partner, to please a partner, to like pleasure is very much framed around like for the man's pleasure. So it's like a wife role, whereas it's like, how can you connect with your partner of like, hey, like this is super interesting for me, but I'm really not feeling like sex, and explaining to a way that it's not them, it's not that they're not turning you on, it's like, fuck, I'm in a completely different role in life, I've never navigated this before, like how can we go through this together? And so often, and this is the beautiful thing about vulnerability, so often when we open up, our partner will too, right? And they'll be like, gosh, I've been feeling that, like I've been feeling you've been disconnected, and I thought I was doing something.
That's amazing.
I've also been disconnected, or I'm also really stressed at work, and I'm navigating this parenthood thing, and I don't know, like this is feeling thing, and I'm worried about your pleasure. Like, so it opens the spectrum, but it does sometimes take someone to lead, right? And the beautiful thing in partnership is when we come together and we start to communicate and we start to have these things, we can take different roles of leading. And I think it's about getting clear on what you want it to look like, and knowing like it might take you to go first, right? And it might take you a few times to go first, but to understanding of being one, I would say, and that being radically honest with yourself, understanding, is this just a season in life that you need to honor it? Like, how can you bring pleasure in life? Like in motherhood, sometimes pleasure might look like taking a nap. Don't shame yourself. Don't shame yourself for having the nap and that it's not sex. Or it might look like you just want to cuddle for 30 minutes or 15 minutes or 5 minutes with your partner. Like you just want to be held, right? That's all you want. And at the moment, that is what intimacy looks like. How can you let that be more nourishing to yourself than now forcing yourself to go into a sexual experience that has the potential to be traumatic because you don't want it? And what that will do is it will create resentment for your partner. It will create disconnect to yourself. You've overstepped your boundary, right? And now you're in a place where you're having sex, but there's no emotional connection. It's like a physical act that you don't want to be doing. And that is felt so deeply. So I would say to really listen to yourself and to honor yourself and just to notice the shifts and get creative. This is the beautiful thing. There's no right or wrong, right? We've all got to explore.
Exactly. Oh, so I love that so much, that intimacy, and it's such an awesome reminder that intimacy doesn't necessarily mean that sexual pleasure. You can have intimacy without that. So there's no reason that just because you're going through a stage of less sex that you shouldn't, or that you should give up on the intimacy side of it. And Shanta, I could honestly speak to you for absolute ever, but I do want to just chat on one more thing. And that is, and as I was thinking, I think we've covered quite a lot on if the mum in the situation is not as into the sexual thing, or feels that responsibility. What if it is the opposite way around, that you are the partner that would like more sex, and the other partner just isn't as into it? And I think that we do, or maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like we do live in an age where it's even more scary as a woman to kind of initiate sex. Why is that, and how can we break that?
Absolutely. So again, this comes with the conversations and being more embodied in ourselves. And in partnership, I'm a big believer in mirroring and giving essentially what we would like to receive, right? So how do we approach that and share that and receive our partner when they are in that state, when they are maybe going through the sexual winter and we are going through a sexual summer? And this is a whole nother topic, but it's essentially that will happen in partnership. It's going to happen all the time. But how would we approach that in a way that we would like it to be approached, right? How would we want to be approached if we were the person that wasn't feeling the disconnect, the turn on, the like, we just want to be ravished, we just want to be taken, we feeling like we just want to be held, we just want to be tender, right? How do we do that? So that would be through the conversations. And then how can you meet your partner where you're at? I find a lot goes through when these conversations are had, it's often miscommunication that actually is in the way of, it gets in the way of intimacy. It gets in the way. It could be that the partner maybe thinks, well, I'm just trying to respect you in this mother role, and I thought maybe you're busy, and I thought maybe you're tired, and I didn't want to put pressure on you, right? Meanwhile, all she wants is to be like having a thriving sex life, right? So I would say in that is to again focus on your own sexuality, so that know that self-pleasure is powerful in partnership, right? It doesn't mean that you've got a bad sex life. And in that, bringing this attention to your partner, so noticing what ways can you still create this intimacy in your partnership if they are in a place where they might need you to honor them, right? They might be in a place where they are feeling depletion and they're feeling a bit more vulnerable and they're not feeling like that. How can your needs still be met, and how can that be open in partnership so that it's not done undercover, because that's where the disconnect comes from, right? So okay, great, they're knowing like this is a time where I'm going to explore myself and it's going to be beautiful, right? And more often than not, that will bring it so naturally leads in to both coming onto the same page again. And then noticing again where you're still feeling connected to your partner in that, but again that comes with debunking this belief that we can't initiate, right? And in that, we started this off with reframing. How do we reframe that? How does that become empowering, right? And in that will take us to our own shadows of rejection, because the only reason that we will fear the initiation is we fear being rejected. We fear being told no, right? We fear like it can bring different things up for different people, but it's like, initiate. And if it's no, then how do we honor the no? But often it might not be the no, right? And it's a beautiful thing to, it will always reflect, it will always go both ways. So pretty much what I've said on that it will reflect where sometimes it's going to be you, sometimes it's going to be your partner, and coming back onto the same page is that. But it's beautiful because a sexual thriving in one will naturally elevate a sexual thriving in the other partner. So that's why they go hand in hand, and it's beautiful to co-create it and to explore it and have the conversations that create so much depth.
And I'm guessing also, those conversations that you're having, one of the biggest things of them is that it stops us from going into a position of taking it personally, because then we really understand that the other person is just stressed or just this, or, so I love that. Shans, I'm not going to keep you for too much longer, but give us one piece of passing advice, and then we would love to know where we can get more information about you, where we can follow you. And I know that you have a very special offer for all the ladies on this group that I'm very grateful for, and I hope that everyone joins up. So please share that all with us.
Yeah, no, I love this. I could also chat for hours, because there's like topics can go into like,
I know,
other ones, right? But
we're going to have you back on here.
My last bit of advice. We'll have to get some more questions, and we'll jump back on. But my last piece of advice is that, sex is how a mom became an adult, a mom or an adult became a mom, a parent, right? I just totally butched that. What I'm trying to say is essentially sexuality. Yeah, try again. Sexuality is how someone gets initiated into the role of a parent, is essentially what I'm getting at. But it's often the parents and the adults who can't speak about sex, right? And because they can't embody it. So the big reason why I've gone into this work is to create safety for future generations and for children, right? And as adults and as parents, we need to become more embodied in our pleasure, in our sexuality, right? In our safety, to be able to better lead as a parent, because a child learns through watching. And what I see happening is everyone's telling kids about sexuality, not to have sex, use protection, do this, all of that, but they're not they can't hold the conversations, right? And they can't do that because they're not comfortable with it, because they're not embodied in it. And what I have found, and through this, where a child is shamed, right? And we can go into the elements of, dealing with like when a child is starting to explore sexuality and self-pleasure and all of that, because there's a beautiful innocence in children as well of sexuality that gets shamed. And this is how a lot of us now as adults have become disconnected to our body, right? But where a child is shamed and they are made to feel stupid and they are judged, they will no longer feel safe in their place of safety. And down the line, when they have questions about sex, about sexuality, when they experience where boundaries are overridden, where trauma comes up, they will not go to the places where they have experienced that shame and that judgment. So my biggest encouragement is, as a mom, as a parent, to become so connected to your pleasure, to your body, to your sexuality, so that you can better support a child, right? Or not only does it fulfill your role as like a mother and a thriving sexual being, but it also supports your role in how you can guide a child, because they watch, we teach self-love and love your body, but then often the first ones to be yo-yo dieting, to be shaming ourselves when we look in the mirror, feel embarrassed when we're in a costume. A child picks that up. It goes exactly the same in the way that adults can't lead topics of sex education, of when questions are asked about sex or sexuality or the body. So my piecing advice is become so connected to this in yourself for you, and then beyond that, knowing how that ripple effect will happen in your partnership, in your parenting, right, in your friendships, in your health, in everything. It's such a pivotal part of life that has become so shamed and taboo, but because of that, it holds the greatest power, because you're overcoming the part of yourself that has been silenced. So it's a beautiful journey.
And now you've just made me want to like open every other door, because we definitely need to have another conversation. Because
we'll do another conversation.
That's huge about also how that impacts our kids. But let's not even go there, because then we're just going to be chatting for hours. So where can we find you? Tell us about your course, what you offer.
Beautiful. So a lot of different things. You can find me, the best place on Instagram, at native_nude. You can maybe pop it out, or I can pop it on the chat on the Facebook group. Yeah. And then the website is nativenude.com, right? So Native Nude has a whole different spectrum. I've got pleasure ones, and I'm going to keep this very brief. So I'd encourage you to go have a look at the site. But everything is made out of beautiful crystal or glass. And the whole element of this is for slow pleasure. So I intentionally don't bring in a lot of vibrations or anything like that. So it's really about it connecting to the slowness, to your natural pleasure, because that empowers pleasure with a partnership, and it allows us to confront what is coming up, right? Whereas strong vibrations can numb the body, we override when the body's ready, it creates disconnection. So really bringing into that element of slow pleasure, of understanding the body. So if you're looking to connect to yourself deeper through self-pleasure, or bringing in other elements of partnership, I would encourage you to look at the products. Then there is the coaching element, where I work one-on-one. And then something new that is launching, which is it's to make this work more accessible and more affordable, is a membership, right? So it's a small monthly membership, that a fee for 12 months. And what that is we are kind of going deeper and deeper into these each month through online courses, through live coaching, and then through a community where we're chatting. So that's been, that's a really exciting thing that's launching, and it's women from all around the world. Yeah, women all around the world. So yeah, it's all going to be on the website. You can reach out to me directly, pop me a message. I would love to hear what you thought of this. And yeah, follow on Native Nude for all the upcoming things. So super exciting.
Thanks, Shani. And guys, I encourage you all to really go and have a look at everything that Shani's offering. I know, especially those pleasure ones as well. There's different ones for different things. And even if you're not buying it, I mean, just for me, just reading the stuff and following you for these years, it's so interesting. I love it. So everyone go and have a look and follow Shani. Chance, thank you. And I really do hope to have you back. And we'll keep in touch and chat soon.
Oh, thank you so much, love. And I look forward to the next conversations.
Yay! Thanks, Chance. Bye, everyone.
Bye.